The Almost Perfect Podcast.
Welcome to the Almost Perfect Podcast, a celebration of fuck ups, failures, and falling flat on your face. This is a podcast that believes you can learn from experience, but that experience doesn't have to be your own. Ha, I'm Bob Perfect, and I'm a functional fuck up. Let's learn from somebody else's mistakes. And today we're learning from Camilla Pontiggia. Now, Camilla is an artist who mostly dabbles in film as well as poetry and a range of different visual arts. But the stuff we get into a lot of, well, actually, we talk about her whole artistic journey, but we do discuss film quite a bit because I met Camilla at the Durban International Film Festival. It's part of the DFM, which is the Film Mart part, which is more of the industry side of things. And Camilla was someone who paid to go and be a part of the whole thing and took in every single lecture, well, not lectures, workshops and panel discussions and just like a whole host of different activities and events around film. And so we ran into each other when I was hosting, I was facilitating one of the panel discussions. No, not one of the panel discussions, one of the round table discussions on documentary filmmaking. And we got to chatting afterwards, and I was just like, yo, you're doing some cool shit. So maybe we should chat on the podcast. And so here we are today. I actually did it, I met someone new, and finally, because like that has been a thing I've been wanting to do on the podcast, but like I'm always a little bit nervous to meet new people, like, and then interview them. I'm still, like, I know that sounds weird, but like, yeah, like it's with these kind of things, you need to have a bit of a rapport with people, and you need to, I don't know, be interested in what they're doing to be able to have a good conversation. And so when I met Camilla, I was like, damn, like, yeah, your documentary stuff sounds really cool. Your view of the world seems cool. And in the conversation that you're going to hear, you're going to see I was correct about all of that. And she, yeah, has some, like, I just enjoyed her talking about her struggle essentially as an artist to figure out, why the fuck she is doing the whole thing. Although not her words, my words there. But yeah, essentially just trying to figure out, you know, what does she have to say when it comes to art. And, now she's kind of figured that all out and is creating a bunch of different things and learnt a ton at the Film Mart at DIF. And we get into all of that on the podcast. This one is coming to you a little bit late because the comedy festival definitely took up a lot more time than I was expecting, and I don't know why I'm saying that. Like, how could I expect to put together a comedy festival and not expect it to take up some amount of time, which it did. So I actually also didn't manage to, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I didn't manage to get any podcast done during that time. I wanted to interview one or two of the comedians, but things were just a bit too manic, things were a bit too hectic, and so I didn't get to do that. But I'm sure I'll get to meet up with all of them again around the country at some point soon, because I'm looking to take my one-man show, The End of the World, around the country. I've already got a venue kind of sorted out in Joburg. Not kind of sorted out. I know of a venue I want to use, but I've got the contact details and an understanding of how much it all costs and someone to help me with some other stuff with that. So yeah, it looks like I might be coming to Joburg. I'm not going to say when. I've just got to organize that first. And then also maybe Cape Town. Pretty keen to come down there and bring the show. I do need to tighten it up. I want to also just thank everyone, by the way, who came out to the Heat City Comedy Festival. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I really want to thank you all for coming to if you came to any of the nights. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All the comedians obviously do. And I'm sure you appreciated getting to laugh along with all our zany thoughts and I don't know, interesting views of the world. And I also want to especially thank people who came out to my show at the End of the World. There were quite a few of you there who are the podcast listeners, because I gave some of you free tickets. The patrons on Patreon got some free tickets if they wanted them. And yeah, it was really dope to just, be in a room full of love, and got to experiment, man. Got to try a lot of, you usually don't do new material in one-man shows. and 90% of that show was new material, but I just needed a place to try this out, and so I did it. It wasn't the best, I think. A lot of other people will lie to my face and tell me it was great, but I need to learn the show better, definitely, before I take it around the country, but I'm going to do that. And there's a lot of different jokes that didn't work, and there were quite a few that really worked. So yeah, some victories and some losses and some things to work on. I'm going to definitely be writing some more, try to tighten it up. And just as time goes on, try and, get the show waxed and make it something cool. And maybe eventually record it and stuff. But that's down the road stuff. For now, though, I'm really stoked to have got it out the way, and that, even though I didn't get it perfect, I did manage to do it. I did manage to write a fucking show, from scratch, basically. I had some of the jokes. I had about 10 minutes of the jokes, probably. And the rest was all just researching and, thinking of different ideas and different ways things could go. And I'm pretty stoked about that, that I managed to get some jokes that people laughed at some pretty deep science stuff and, just some weird ass jokes about the world and how it might end. And if that sounds interesting to you, go to my Facebook page. Let me know which city you want me to come to, either Joburg or Cape Town. Basically, I just want to see if I'll have enough people in either city who want to see me do some stand-up comedy and who want to see me do my one-man show. And then I'll arrange for that to happen. I am an independent stand-up comedian and artist in every sense of the word. And so, I do these things on my own dime, especially the comedy festival was not sponsored this year. Well, we got a bit of beer from Heineken, so thank you to them. But other than that, we also got media sponsorship from DYR. But what I mean is we didn't get money from the peeps. And so, this year was very, very tight on the finances. And this is just the way it's done. And so I need to know if there's actual market share, as they say. So if you can let me know over on Facebook or just in general, just hit me up, say, hey, Bob, I would come to your show if you came to my city. And then also actually come to my show because it's expensive to do these things and people don't show up. But other than that, I also want to thank all the comedians who came through to the Heat City Comedy Festival. I really appreciate all of you coming and joining us here in Durban for the week, and also obviously all the Durban comedians for delivering the goods. Everyone's gotten a lot better over the last 2 years, and I'm hoping at next year's festival that things with a promo. If you like this podcast, you can like us on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter. Well, first on Facebook, you got to go to the Almost Perfect Podcast. And then on Twitter, you got to go almost_podcast. I am on Instagram at almostperfectbob. And if you really like the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/almostperfect, where you can subscribe for it. Well, yeah, for $1 or $5. You get different benefits based on that, like free tickets to my shows. And different giveaways depending on guests and what they give me to give away. And just that sort of thing. It's like a community-based thing, but it's also just hey, we like what you're doing there, Bob. Here's some money for it. Because I do give this to you for free, and like I said, I am an independent artist, so every cent does help. And it does go towards improving the podcast. I am speaking to you right now through a mic stand. I'm not having to hold the mic, all because of the Patreons all because of the patrons on Patreon. One day I'll get that right. One day. But that day is not today. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this whole long spiel so far. We're going to get into the podcast right now. Here it comes with Camilla Pontiggia. Anyway, how you living, Camilla?
Yeah, all good, eh? All good.
All good. You're sounding like you're feeling a little awkward.
Like I said to you earlier, I think this thing staring at me freaks me out a bit, but I'll get into it.
Well, we were actually just talking about the mighty Boosh.
Yes.
So you like awkward comedy? Because that is some
so
surreal, weird... Oh man, I love, just Noel Fielding in general.
Oh, I'm such a big fan. The mighty Boosh, I discovered them years ago when I was first living in Cape Town, I think. And then I remember a couple of months going overseas, traveling, and one of the countries I went to was England. And I had very little money, but the one thing that I had said to myself going overseas was, I have to find the DVD box set of the Mighty Boosh, because you couldn't find it in South Africa.
No, that was a downloads kind of thing. That
Yeah.
was people just
Yeah.
ripping it and putting it on
Yeah.
DVDs and sharing it with each other kind of thing.
Yeah. And I found it, and I watched it relentlessly on the couch with my roommate, and to the point that I knew things off by heart, particularly all the songs related to cheese. Yeah, so it's a good one.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
So you're in film. What do you actually do? Because I met you at the Durban Film Mart, which was part of DIF. And you came and sat to one of the roundtable discussions that was happening, and we were discussing documentaries essentially. And we got to chatting, and I quite liked your ideas that you had for mockumentaries essentially. But let's go back to the beginning. You're like a filmmaker in which regard?
Yeah, I always struggle with that question. I think because in some ways I'm trying to formulate, if I had to call myself something in a brief way, what would it be? And I think even though sometimes I feel like a bit of a fraud in claiming it, I think the term that I would say I am first and foremost is an artist. And it's not that I'm exhibiting in galleries currently or anything like that, and maybe that can be a conversation for later, just in terms of where art's place is to begin with, because I feel strongly about that, and I think that's why I would call myself an artist. And then within that, I'm really passionate about, I've often worked with film or video art as a medium, in part of trying to create things, and the more I got into it, the more I just really loved it. And when my art degree ended and I was like, I need to make some money after travels and everything, I kind of ended up in art departments of TV sets and that sort of thing. And so from there, slowly more and more got into filmmaking. And so nowadays, after a couple of years of being in the industry, I've been directing and editing. I mean, when I say directing, I don't mean films, although that is a dream of mine. But yeah, so I would say artist and director / filmmaker, in the sense of wanting to somehow combine art and film in a way that kind of really goes beyond the boundaries of both.
Okay. And so visual arts has always been the medium you like to speak with?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So as I said, my background is in art. I think even back then, I felt really strongly about wanting to play with that one medium just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And that there was so much more to communicate, and that different ideas or different thoughts or different questions needed to be communicated through different mediums, because not everything was well suited to painting. And so I just... I also get bored very easily, so I just struggled to commit to one medium. And I've forgotten what your question was.
You usually speak in visual arts, visual mediums.
Yes,
so,
okay, back on track. So I was starting to explain to you how that started, which was back in varsity, and I just felt dissatisfied with having to stick to one thing. And so I ultimately stuck to many things, and it was just a combination of installation, video art, sound art, performance, sculpture, but in a very non-sculptural sense, like everything that is not meant.
What do you mean?
Well, it was stuff like, I mean, look, when you talk to people who aren't within a creative field or specifically in the art field, when they ask you sculpture, they mean like, is it something made out of stone or wood? I made things out of newspaper and cardboard boxes and fabric, which is not a crazy thing within like the conceptual art world of contemporary days, but for some people it's still a bit of a mind bender. And then I think out of that was just born this desire for a multidisciplinary way of making that I wasn't really seeing happening too much, and I just have and still have, and I think will possibly be a lifetime's pursuit, a gut instinct that there is something for combining different creative fields together where sometimes people feel like they don't belong, that there's something really powerful in the things that it can communicate, particularly in our world that is so saturated with imagery. Like people are just bombarded with stuff and it's exhausting. And I think, and not because my end goal is like, I want 1 million people to see my work, but because I feel really passionate about it, that combining many different mediums and working collaboratively across fields just has such explosive power for communicating something that has meaning. And I'm especially passionate also about work that is related to social justice. So I think those kind of messages, they can just get lost in the noise, because who wants to listen to sad things, and difficult things.
But it's also, I was speaking to Charles about this the other day, it's just been co-opted. Like social justice messages are now the mainstream ad messaging, especially when it's, we've got Women's Month coming up in South Africa. We just had Pride. In America they have Black History Month, and each time, here we've got Nelson Mandela Day, we've got all these things where these are all social justice things, these are all things where people are doing good things, but it's now just become this crass commercial thing. And do you worry that a lot of creatives are unfortunately on the side of making these products now instead of doing the collaborative thing like you're talking about, where we can actually create real things with real meaning?
Yeah, potentially. I think it's an individual question for every artist to engage with themselves, is at the heart of what you're doing, do you have a sense of, is it coming from a deep space of sincerity and of having engaged with that topic with all your heart and soul, and sorry to be so deep about it, but I just
don't be sorry, please.
Yeah, I don't think you can afford to be superficial when it comes to dealing with the most pressing issues of our time, and I think that as an artist you really have to be engaging at very deep levels with the content that you're making, because if you don't, people can feel it, and we live in an age where people are desperate for authenticity, and it's a word that gets thrown around very lightly.
Do you really believe that?
I think people don't know that they want it, but I think more than ever, I think people are very unaware that they need it, and they're very content to...
See, actually, I'm with you there. Need it is more than want it.
Sorry, I should have said need, because they don't... It's like people don't necessarily know what they
want.
What they need.
It sounds like people don't know what they need. People kind of know what they want, although people are sold what they want. So you're told this is actually what you want, and then when you're in the right age bracket for that advert and everything, and all your friends are also doing the thing, and it's horrible how it all works. I'm not a big fan of just in general, but a part of me because you've worked in the industry of filmmaking and short form stuff, so I assume you probably worked in advertising.
To an extent, minimally so. I've tried to stay away from it.
How have you managed to do that as a filmmaker?
So like I said, I think I started out working on TV sets. So
I didn't listen there properly.
No, it's fine.
TV sets to me just means film sets. But so actual TV.
So I worked on a couple of TV sets. So that was a combination of drama series, and then there was like some reality TV series, and then
that must be a good experience, like straight out, of varsity.
I mean, it wasn't straight out of varsity, but anyway, the point is to say that I basically went in there not knowing anything, and I was like, tra-la-la-la-la, hi, and people were incredibly accommodating and welcoming. Got very lucky actually to get that first job.
Were you like, going into it, did you feel like everyone was going to be like, who's this new person, or why are they fucking up and stuff? Because I know like a lot of people, like when they're going into their first day on like a big like project or something, and like they've never done it before, they're always thinking like, how am I gonna fuck this up?
I think partially I was somewhat blissfully ignorant, which helped me. Because if you don't fully know what you're getting into, in some ways you're kind of protected from the potential horrors of what you're getting into. Also, I think the girl that hired me was someone that I'd previously somewhat known in varsity, and so I kind of felt a tiny sense of safety in that. But then obviously there's huge nervousness about, I don't know what the set looks like.
Yeah.
I'm just rocking in here being like, hey, I'm the new art department girl, and maybe I piss people off but I think that when you walk into spaces with a willingness to learn and humility, there's not too much that can go wrong, really. When you walk in with that attitude, whatever goes wrong ultimately is okay, because you apologize and you work with it. And I think
when people are more accommodating than you think.
Yes, very much so. Especially if you say, hey, I'm so sorry, I didn't know that, like I'm learning or I'm new to this. I think, and it's counterintuitive to the world, because I think often you get told you need to fake it till you make it, which there's definitely something to be said for that.
Yeah.
And I fully agree with the concept
ask
up to a point.
questions when you need to know stuff.
Yeah, and also I think, what was my point? Is that, look, so for me, I'm just a painfully sincere person. Like, I was just born that way, sometimes to my detriment, but ultimately I think I found that it's valuable, because you would think that to be vulnerable with people and honest will implode on you and will cause self-destruction of your career, or of like how good you may look in other people's eyes.
Well, especially in an industry that is based on what people say about you a lot.
Yeah. But funnily enough, I have found that being vulnerable and honest, within reason, obviously. I think, again, this is a conversation that can go on a whole other long tangent, but there's healthy vulnerability and then there's unhealthy vulnerability, where you can overshare and freak people out when it's not the time and place.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, and you can bring Brene Brown into that. But I do think that too often we're too scared to just show up as ourselves, and kind of back yourself as like, this is who I am in all my awkwardness, and actually that makes me wonderful. And just be okay with that, and people tend to love it, actually. And I often have come to be known on set as like, Camilla the strange girl, not the strange girl, sorry,
like Emily the Strange.
Yeah, it's like Camilla, that shy, slightly awkward girl who has funny voices when she speaks, but is kind of adorable in that way, and so we like her. And it's just like, you come to have really incredible times on set for being that human,
But isn't like film full of like wonderful weirdos though?
Yes, no, it's a beautiful space, and the amazing thing is, because you spend such long hours on set with people, you get to see their quirks.
Oh yeah.
You can also find that there are some people who are just not very nice, and you're like, cool, I'll choose to not spend 12 hours too close to you a day on set. But for the most part, it's you can really, but again, it kind of warrants you showing up as yourself, and that kind of allows people the space and the freedom to then also show up as themselves with all their quirks and oddities, and that's where I've nurtured the best relationships on set, actually.
Yeah, I think like I definitely get that, and like as I've grown older, I've kind of realized that kind of thing, and so the relationships I have with people can be more sincere. But when I was younger, like stuff would be way more of an act almost, like with other people, and like, so I wouldn't get their real selves back. Have you? So you say you've always had this like sincerity thing, but did you always realize it was a good thing, or did you like think like, oh no, like, well, because you've said like you've kind of like made hints at the fact that like you think there might be a negative thing at times, but
yeah, for sure. I think with all the very strong qualities within each of us, or the strong traits within each of us, there's incredible potential for it to be nurtured into something amazing or really strong, but there's always kind of the flip side to it, which if you aren't careful can be incredibly destructive, and so I think Yeah, I mean, I think the classic years of the early teen years, all that angst of trying to figure yourself out. I think my inability to sometimes not fully show what I was feeling or thinking, or even if I didn't say something but you could see it on my face, or if I was feeling particularly awkward, it was so painfully obvious, and I didn't have that cool factor of like just putting on another persona. I mean, I was what I was, and sometimes it was good, and sometimes it was really bad, and it was just really awkward. And it forces you to confront yourself for sure. Like you just have to, because you can't run away from that aspect. And I've also learned very much so that trying to run away from yourself is just never a conducive way to live life. And the sooner that you kind of work with what you've got and figure out how to befriend it, the sooner you just become a stronger, happier human, you know?
Yeah, I've said it for years, you can't run away from yourself. But what brought you to that point? Like, what made you realize that? If you don't mind me asking.
No, not at all. I think I luckily come from a family of incredibly deep thinkers and feelers, and so within my house, my parents always welcomed and celebrated moments of vulnerability, or of needing to speak about things when you were feeling very strongly about something, or if as kids we were struggling to process something, where because we felt so deeply and thought and questioned so deeply, but obviously as a child you don't always have the words to process that verbally yet. We were just given an environment that allowed for the space and time to figure that out. And so I think that kind of stuff just made sense to me from very young. And it was kind of always a part of my existence, you know, of just of knowing that the best way to be a human was to keep trying to find peace with yourself and love yourself. Not to say that I was able to do that as a young kid, and I think that is a struggle that I have even these days. Sometimes you like, how do you love yourself in healthy ways? It's really the cry of the human soul, you know. But I would like to think that I'm getting better and better at it with each year that goes by.
I mean, I don't want to put your age on blast, but
no,
like,
not at all. I love my age.
Cool,
my age is amazing.
I was gonna say, like, I'm 32 now, and I'm loving being in my 30s. And you were saying, like, you're 30 now, and you hate, like, we're all the 30-year-olds in Durban, but at the same time, like, I'm sure it comes with, like, with this renewed sense of, like, confidence almost, like this quiet, like, thing of, you know what? I made it through my fucking 20s. I kind of know who I am now. I've got a better idea than like I used to. And you know what? Things are probably going to be okay.
Yeah. I think we've been sold such a lie about your 20s. I think
20s are hell, man.
I'm just like, what are people telling teenagers that your 20s are the years to thrive and to live and to party it up, and then everything sucks after that? We've been sold such a lie. I feel like...
Go to the park. Read a fucking book.
Yeah. I mean...
Invest in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. But also just that your 20s are hard. I mean, maybe some people got lucky and they figured themselves out earlier. But, you know, I spent most of my 20s, as is normal and okay, but we get told it's not okay, really confused about what do I want to do with my life. Or kind of sort of knowing I feel really passionate about being a creative, but I have no idea how to turn that into sustainable income. And I don't know how to turn my big idealistic dreams of the fact that I believe art can change the world into something that looks like viable work, you know. And
amen.
I mean, that's again another conversation that we can go into. But
well,
the point is that...
you're speaking to a lot of people who listen to this when you say that.
Yeah, but you know... I think where I felt so stuck and so torn by it, now being 30, I have such a renewed sense of confidence and direction, and a renewed sense of purpose, and I feel more capable because I know that I've got well, not necessarily 10 years, but nearly 10 years of like real work experience to back me where I'm like, I've done something and I am actually capable. And I think that's partially the importance of finally having stepped into freelance this year, which I think in some ways I feel is really late in life to step into freelance.
I think it's a good time to do it actually,
Yeah.
because you've got experience, you've got stability of having, you know, I don't know if you save money or not before you started freelancing, but like a lot of people do, you know, like before they do, and you've also got a kind of better understanding of it before going into it, and maybe you've got a better understanding of what clients want and stuff like that from having, you know, worked like in, you know, the more commercial side of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, what is the freelance life like for you now? So how long have you been doing it for, and like what? So you worked on TV, then went to what, and then now freelance.
Okay, so I was in Joburg after having come back from. I actually lived in Cape Town for a year. Intentionally decided to just forget about art and everything for a year after.
So you went to Cape Town.
Yeah, sorry, I'm backtracking now. I'm actually going backwards.
You did mention Cape Town earlier. Please tell the story how you
okay.
want. But I was just saying, you went to Cape Town to forget about art. Like a lot of people go to Cape Town to like try and make it like in art.
So yeah, it had nothing to do with the art scene in Cape Town. I came out of fourth year completely broken. I had this really intense sort of personal crisis halfway through fourth year studying art, where I just had such big questions around the point of it all.
Amen.
And just knew so deep inside of myself, although I had no way of I can say it now with years of hindsight, but I think back then I didn't even really know how to verbalize it. Just such a strong sense of the fact that as a 20-year-old, I really didn't know enough of the world from my kind of sheltered, privileged background to really be able to comment on anything worthwhile as an artist. And I think there are some people who have...
That's a good time to hone your skills.
Yeah. And I think it's a funny one. Like, you come out of art school and there are certain art schools that will prepare you specifically for the market, and that's not the kind of art school that I went to, which I'm grateful for because that's not the kind of artist I am. Yeah, so in art school, having a crisis and a meltdown, really questioning what is the point of making art, and I think my crisis internally was so partially the fact that I just felt as a gut instinct that I really didn't have a voice yet. I didn't know enough of the world. I didn't have enough experience of it.
And that frustrated you?
Yeah, and not to say that I wouldn't eventually have a voice, but I just knew that I was being pushed to try make work that would have some kind of commentary where actually I had nothing relevant to say, which was kind of heartbreaking. But then also the other thing is because I had just such a profound and always have had such a profound belief that I know that I was made to be a creative person and to make things and to make things with purpose that have value and that would hopefully be part of conversation that helps shift some kind of change, you know. I was kind of heartbroken to find that I didn't fully know whether the system I was in was going to help me get there, and so I was just having this total crisis of like, what even is art? What is the point of art? Can it change people's minds? I was just feeling really sore about the fact of like, I don't actually know anymore if art can change people's minds. I want to believe it, and in my heart I believe it, but currently the reality I'm seeing is that no one cares actually. So eventually, and the funny thing is, the commentary I would get from crit sessions from lecturers was, what is the point of your art? Which it was very difficult to hear, but yeah. But in some ways they kind of touched on my crisis, you know. And so I got to the end of that year, just so grateful that I actually even finished that year. yeah, because I was on the tip of dropping out, and then just decided to push on.
But would you, like, so if you hadn't done that fourth year, or if you had studied somewhere else, do you feel like, you wouldn't have had that crisis, or?
No. I think that crisis would have happened anyway, and I think it's been a foundational question that has pushed me all these years, and it's a question I sometimes still have, because I still believe profoundly in my heart that art has value, but we live in a system that tells us otherwise, that actively has stopped teaching art at school levels because it's not an urgent subject matter, and
that's not the only reason why they're not teaching it. It's because it is powerful. Like, art is, throughout history, has been powerful. It does speak for the people. It's the people having conversation with each other and expressing deep, powerful things. And those things can stir up, the masses. And so personally, I do think there's been a systematic, look at just the same thing with our history. It's the same with lots of things. We're intentionally not taught different things, and they're not focused on because people are scared.
So I think I did kind of get to a space where I just started feeling really disheartened by it all, and I kind of needed to take some time out to regroup, because I just kind of was questioning this whole thing of like, what is the system actually helping me with or not,
I think this is a thing a lot of artists have gone through. I mean, I think it's the quintessential question, like, is, why am I doing this, and what is the fucking point? Because with art especially, you can feel like it's irrelevant, because a lot of what you do, no one sees it, no one, if you put it, on the internet, you might get a few likes out of it, but a lot of the, like, art we create is for ourselves, like, you find, like, unfortunately, but maybe not unfortunately, because at the end of the day, it still has value to you, and the people who do see it can get moved by it, and can actually, and I don't know, I also think, like, the parameters for art have definitely expanded a lot more. Like you say, you're a multimedia artist. It's no longer just like, a painting on a wall or just a film, it's stuff that's crossing over. So where did you get to with this question when you had this crisis? You decided, cool, I'm gonna quit art. Like, did you know were you, because you knew you didn't know, why you were doing it, and you knew you wanted to create change. Did you know that when you took the time off that you were going to come back to it?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I don't know that I even really thought that far. I just knew that my next step was I needed to find some kind of sanctuary of space and time to kind of heal my mind and my heart, and something really simple. So Cape Town, I ended up going there not because it was Cape Town. I think I just needed somewhere that just felt, I hope I don't sound wishy-washy at this, but that just felt like really nurturing and beautiful. And I say this, and I say this because I have a really, really strong passion and belief that beauty is something that sometimes we underestimate, and I don't talk about like superficial beauty in the sense of like, I'm pretty, I got makeup, I'm looking flat, or like materialism. That's not what I'm talking about at all, but there's something to be said for, I mean, let's all be honest, Cape Town, nature-wise, is just beautiful, and there's something...
I don't know, I grew up in Durban, so I'm a little
spoiled. No, for sure. Durban is also so beautiful, and look, and also I get bored by those conversations of city comparison. Like, I have lived in all the big cities, and I've loved them and disliked them for various different reasons, but there's not one that I would say is terrible versus the other,
But Cape Town is pretty.
Yeah, I mean, and I say that from the perspective of there's a beauty to that place that at a deep level is incredibly nourishing. Well, or for me, for the space and time that I was in, was incredibly nourishing for my heart, that was just ravaged by by like a lot of broken feelings around my creativity.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
Like that's why they go to Cape Town.
Yeah.
It is because of how it looks. It also just has its own darkness. Like
No, yeah, and
that's my biggest like
completely.
that's always been like just my biggest like issue with Cape Town. Like I see the veneer and I'm like, I get how this can, like I go to Muizenberg and I'm just like, fuck, I can move here. Like I can live here. Like, you know, but then I'm also just like, I can't actually do this place. This isn't my place. Like Joburg I can do a bit of as well, but the driving.
Yeah, I mean, and just to put into context, like I'm 150% aware about sort of the socio-political mess that is Cape Town, and I'm not trivializing when I talk about how beautiful it is.
No,
but I just knew at a gut instinct, something like that was just going to be good for me for where I was at, and I needed just something really simple. So I ended up waitressing for a year.
Where about did you stay when you were in Cape Town?
Wherever we found the cheapest apartment, which happened to be in Claremont of all places, which you wouldn't think would be cheapest, but somehow we found a super cheap apartment.
I have no idea what costs what. I know Gardens is expensive. Like I had friends who started out in Gardens and then slowly moved further and further away from there as the city got more and more developed, and prices of everything went up. Like people just started moving further and further away from like Long Street. And this was like I see how it goes. And so waitressing in Cape Town for a year.
So I literally just I just couldn't function. I just didn't have capacity to do anything more complex than that, and to do any complex thinking. And so my life was just very, very simple. It was a lot of quiet time to sit and think and be on the beach or go walking or whatever. And I know I probably sound so poncy and privileged when I say this, but anyway.
Don't worry,
But yeah.
We do, we all have our privileges, and people do acknowledge them, but it's also within that privilege we also have those spaces where yes, you can go and walk on the beach and consider your life and stuff, and it's not a negative that you have those privileges. It's good to acknowledge them, but I feel like that's something that weighs on you a lot.
It's a huge thing. I mean, this country has hundreds of years of a history of oppression and privilege, and it's like a really, really big conversation, and I think a huge part of something to reflect on within your identity as a South African, particularly as a white South African. It's just something that you can't afford to not be thinking about. I think we live in really urgent times where if you're not thinking about that, you should consider thinking about that.
But was this like a part of your crisis that you had?
No, I mean, this is a different kind of crisis.
But I'm just saying, did the privilege ever factor into why you were did you feel I'm wasting this stuff that these opportunities I'm given? What is the point? They're different things.
And I mean, definitely we can talk about privilege and stuff, but in this context, it's never been. No, those are two quite separate things in terms of my trying to figure out art making versus my trying to figure out my identity as a white South African.
Do they not cross over though?
Yes, in the sense of nowadays, the content that I'm wanting to make in film and in documentaries, and in the content that I'm interested in making from a visual arts perspective, that definitely crosses over, or is a huge part of it, issues of identity, but not from a, I don't know if the correct word is an ideological perspective. No.
Okay. And what are some of the projects you want to work on?
There's a couple of things that I've been thinking about for a long time. I've got 2 mockumentary series and a documentary. Basically just looking at issues of identity when it comes to our kind of post-apartheid, post-colonial existence as people who are either African and historically have like generations of being African, or people like my parents who came from Italy and moved to South Africa, and I happen to have been born in South Africa. But then you kind of wonder, well, am I allowed to claim being an African? Am I a European who lives on African soil?
How do you feel about those questions?
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I know that it doesn't sit comfortably with me to just in a blasé fashion say, I'm African, and kind of talk about it and kind of trivialize it.
I don't say I'm African, I say I'm South African of European descent.
Yeah.
Like, I'm quite like okay with that, like just personally, like, because I understand African as an identity is way bigger than, you know, just being born in Africa.
Yeah.
It's, and unfortunately, like, I mean, we can redefine these things for ourselves.
Yeah.
Personally, like, I don't, like, I subscribe to anything really when it comes to these things. Like, I would ideally have no nation, none of these things. But within the context of the world, I understand that that's who I am. Like, and that those come with its own preconceived notions. And, you know, other people are going to engage with me based on what their perceptions are, based on history, based on everything, and I have to monitor that and, you know, act accordingly and respond accordingly and give those things consideration, whilst also within my own identity not necessarily subscribing to them, which I feel is like a thing a lot of white, you know, well, European South Africans essentially are probably dealing with as well. Like yourself. I don't know.
Yeah. No, completely. And I think what you kind of find happening around the world is that more and more there's so many people who find themselves with multiple identities in a way, you know, so where
because you've also got the Italian heritage.
Yeah, so you'll kind of, you know, I've grown up with the confusion around where and what home is, and
fair enough, because your parents probably still consider Italy home for a long time, or
no, not really,
okay.
funnily enough, but we did, so I was born here, but we moved there when I was about 9 or 10 and lived there for a few years, and I mean, we're the only people within our family who live here. The rest all live overseas. And so I've got very strong ties to Italy. I mean, my grandparents and aunts and uncles and everyone is there. And it's just a big confusion growing up in terms of trying to figure out where my place was or where my home was. And eventually came to realize that in some ways home was a notion that wouldn't necessarily ever manifest physically for me, you know, that in a way my identity wasn't built on having a solid space to call home, but on living in between, and being someone whose identity is formed in the in-between spaces. And I think you see that a lot. I mean, so what you're finding in Europe, I think over the last 10 to 15 years, my experience of seeing it in Italy in particular, is more and more immigrants moving in, and the kind of crisis of immigrants that Europe is struggling with, and it isn't really handling very well. You're kind of seeing how, I mean, those immigrants will come into those spaces, and then, you know, perhaps they'll have children who then spend like the first 10 years of their life, say in Italy for example, and speak Italian with a more flawless accent than I ever will. And
the local people there might not consider them to be Italian.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, there's a huge fear there. It's quite shocking how openly fearful and sometimes racist people can be there. I
mean, obviously South Africa is like, you know, we're champions of racism here, but there actually is, like, all around the world, a lot of anti-black racism. Like, it's like,
big time.
when I say black, I mean like Steve Biko black, essentially. You know, like, where it's, you know, white versus people of color, essentially.
Yeah, and anything that is not white is just feared deeply. I mean, it's a little bit shocking to see. So, you know, having watched a lot of people move into Italy who are not Italian, but have kind of taken on an Italian identity, as I said, that is more Italian than I'll ever be. Even there's kind of an identity that's forged in the in-between there, you know, because they are also living in spaces where their parents are trying to preserve their culture, and you can kind of see that in the sort of shops that they set up. It's kind of incredible. It looks like being somewhere in South Africa, or if not South Africa, you know, what you've seen from like images of typical little shops or stores in other African countries, which is kind of beautiful, but it's such a strange contrast when you're in this like teeny tiny Italian village that is centuries old.
To see essentially a spaza shop.
And you're seeing a spaza shop, and anyway, so and you hear these kinds of stories, you know, with people who like Africans who for many generations have been in America, and that kind of identity that's also, you know, they're trying to figure out. Basically my point is just to say that there's more and more people who find that their identity sits in the space in between, and I think for many people it's a crisis for themselves, and they find it very hard to navigate, and it's kind of heartbreaking, but I think I'm getting to a point where I'm starting to believe that being people whose identity has been forged in the hardship of sitting in between, I think there is such power in that actually, and that there is potential for I hesitate to say solutions because
new ideas,
but for new ideas or for new thinking and for new ways of empowering those people, like for empowering
different cultures, different communities.
Just for much more empowered thinking, you know, or for those who have been the most disempowered for the longest. I think peoples who I think people who understand that identity of sitting in between have a lot of potential to just be really productive conversation starters or challenges of the status quo, you know.
Because you get a lot more insight into things from both sides, from different sides.
Yes, I think there's a sensitivity to understanding both sides of a very complex situation, and so I personally get really excited to meet people who have come from those kinds of spaces, and
I mean, South Africa is also full of them. We've got a huge community of people from around the world here, you know, from Africa and you know the rest of the world. We like in terms of South Africa, not in terms of South Africa, in terms of Africa, we kind of like the United States, like in that, like we're that melting pot kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, we've still got a lot of different kinds of racism and different kinds of hatreds because of it.
Yeah. Not exactly following on from your point, but just looking specifically in South Africa, I think another thing in terms of identities forged in these in-between spaces is also looking at it's a different kind, because it's not necessarily across nationalities, but I think a lot of younger South African generations who come from backgrounds where they would, like maybe their parents have lived in rural areas and they've kind of gone to schools like former Model C schools, and I've kind of come up with that sort of education, who, you know, I've got a lot of friends who come from that background who it's been heartbreakingly hard for them to navigate that and try and understand the roots of their culture versus sort of this this modern like privileged white society that they find themselves in, and finding it very difficult and very confrontational and having to figure out how to navigate those two. And I mean, in so many of the conversations I've had, again, as difficult and heartbreaking I think as it must be to be forced to live in between those two worlds and be forced to see the vast and stark realities between those two worlds, in some ways I get excited for those young people because I feel like they, as I said, they have this kind of identity that's forged in between these two spaces, and I think that they are potentially those bridges between vast differences in culture that struggles to have any way of communicating, you know. And I think they are potentially, I just get excited to kind of support and back those kind of people who find themselves in those spaces, because I'm like, you have solutions and ideas that I could never in a million years think of or know, because you will have gone through a refining process through that hardship, where you will have a voice that comes from that, you know.
Why mockumentaries?
Oh man, they're just such a funny medium. I got obsessed with watching Parks and Recreation a few years ago. And Amy Poehler is just...
She's fantastic.
I just love her with all my heart, and I love what she does. So Parks and Recreation has just been such a huge inspiration for me, particularly because I really love stories that aren't about big people. I love stories that are about the usually kind of the forgotten or the most mundane.
Yeah.
And then sometimes even the ones that people just really don't want to hear their stories, you know, where you're like, I don't want to know the story about that small person in that small town, that, like, why should I care, you know?
Yeah,
and
the shopkeeper of a biltong shop.
Yeah, and those are stories for me that are actually, there's so much rich stuff to dig at and scratch. And I think what I loved about Parks and Recreation is that it was 7 seasons worth of officials in a government building. And it was smart, and it was satirical, and it had like really great commentary, but never in a way that was off-putting, where you're like, I don't want to watch this anymore because I feel overloaded by politics. Although sometimes I think they could have pushed it a bit more, to be honest.
But that's the thing, it wasn't political. Like,
no.
Like, it was a show about mundane life and bureaucracy, and just the reasons why your stuff's not getting fixed, like, around town, is because the people doing it are incompetent.
So I think I just loved how they were able to make 7 seasons. I think it was 7, sorry if I'm wrong, if anyone out there knows that it's 9, and please don't shoot me, but I unfortunately never got to the end of it, because then at some point I stopped having access to a TV, and I'm not very good at downloading things, and I just didn't manage to see the final seasons, but that's another conversation.
I'll get it for you.
Yeah. But so no one tell me what happens. I only got to season 5.
I will literally download it for you
Okay.
and give it to you,
But yeah, and then I also just really loved, I loved that style, so that very sort of
Did you know what's The Office before that?
So, funnily enough, The Office,
like,
I
think
it started... Yeah, no, and this is a bit embarrassing to admit, because you would have thought I would have seen The Office way before I saw Parks and Recreation.
Yeah,
but
especially because you're talking about now, like...
I know, and they kind of... Yeah. So just to disclaimer is that I think The Office got really popular at a time when, like I said, I didn't have TV, and I think it was in the days before you got stuff really on the interwebs, or like it was early days, and I'm not lying when I say I'm not competent with the internet. Like, I do the basic things I need to do, and then beyond that I just have no capacity for it. So
but you're an editor, like, that takes, you need to learn how to use like this massive like program. That's like, I could never, like, I could never, like, I look at that stuff and I'm like, how, Sway, how? But like, downloading something is literally the easiest thing in the world.
It's just, I swear to you, it's a different part of the brain, because I can use Premiere Pro and I can do the things, but the internet just confounds me. I know, it's just a very odd quirk, and please don't hate me for it, but basically The Office kind of missed me. It just passed me by, and I somehow like just kept not seeing it. So it is something I still need to watch. And that is all I have to say on that. I apologize to all the Office fans.
Maybe you don't need to watch it, because I mean, it would influence you know, like what you might do, baby.
Yeah.
And like it's the influence that everyone basically has, like so
Yeah.
much. Although, have you seen American Vandal?
No.
Oh my god. I'll
Am
give
I
you
showing my ignorance?
No, not at all. It's on Netflix, and like
Okay.
not a lot of people know about it. And it had my friend Neil Green take me like 20 times telling me watch the show before I did. But I've got to download it. I'll give it to you.
Okay.
It's, in terms of mockumentary, oh my god, it's like so funny. It's basically taking the piss out of true crime shows.
Oh wow.
Yeah, just but done
Oh
with
wow.
a great a great comedic not a MacGuffin, but like just a plot device that makes the whole thing work perfectly throughout.
Yeah.
So for what you do, I think it would definitely be worthwhile. But with mockumentary, you can say a lot though, like, can't you?
Yeah, and I think there's also so much nuance in the camera work as well, because the camera becomes a character in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so there's a third layer of humor or satire or commentary
That's on the form of
that is
documentary
just
itself.
hysterical. Yeah. And I think I also really like it because it sits somewhere weirdly in documentary. I mean, it's called mockumentary because it's somewhat like a fake documentary. And I'm hugely passionate about documentaries, but I'm passionate about making documentaries in much more highly creative ways than we've seen historically, which is the archival footage and the standard talking heads.
This is what I wanted to actually chat to you about, because this was something you brought up at Diff.
Yeah.
In the roundtable discussions that I thought was quite interesting. Like, what do you mean? Like, so you want to use like a more mockumentary based thing for actual documentaries? Like, what do you mean?
No, I think
So-
the mockumentary series that I want to make are more classically
And
your
then-
mockumentary series. The
So how do you want to do the
documentary,
documentary differently? Like, because you were saying you wanted to have real life footage with like other kind of film footage.
Yeah. So in some ways, I think I'm still trying to figure out what the visual look and feel of that would be. But in some of the work that I've done in the past with the documentary shorts that I've made, I've really started trying to figure out a visual style that goes beyond telling someone's story in just the standard talking heads interview with some footage slapped on top of it.
Yeah.
Really wanting to incorporate visual arts elements into it, and somehow find a way of doing it in a sophisticated enough way that feels like it can be both an artwork as well as a film, and somehow
Have you seen any examples of it before? Or any
yes
works
and
that
no.
you like?
I've seen things that touch on it. Funnily enough, although this is like full on art house, but it's very beautiful. Yesterday at Diff, I watched Mother, I'm Suffocating.
Oh, I've heard like about this multiple times now at
Yeah.
the festival. Like,
Yeah.
did you like it or?
Yeah,
Okay.
very powerful.
I got swayed against it, so I need to actually go watch it then.
Yeah, I would highly recommend watching it. It's not for everyone because it is very right brain thinking in terms of how a story is told, and it has that kind of classic art house feel to it, but it basically is like one really long video art piece. I mean, I could imagine that being screened in a gallery as an artist's film, so yeah, I just love the idea of playing with traditional narratives or how a narrative is told. I love narratives that are layered, so where things don't necessarily come to a final conclusion, but like if there's 3 different elements in the film that speak to each other but don't directly come to a final conclusion. And when I say that, I mean, for example, like this film that I watched yesterday, there's a woman who speaks, and it's almost kind of a letter, which feels quite poetic, so a letter come poem that you hear throughout as the kind of main narrative that gets you through. And then there's this constant repeat of a woman walking and she's carrying a cross, and then there's other visual elements that kind of you return to back and forth, and so in some ways those are sort of 3 different elements that overall, over the 2 hours of experiencing this thing, as you let it wash over you, you start finding connection points, but you and your brain make that for yourself. It's not like they're
it's
given
like,
to you, you know.
You have to think about these things.
Yeah, or in a maybe like a less in a more, another example, but this is in the form of a book, is for whoever has read Ankie Kroch's Begging to be Black. So, and she does this with other books of hers as well. She's got an incredible way of writing narratives where there's like 3 stories in one that parallel each other. They never cross over, they never directly speak to each other. But as you, again, let those stories wash over you, you get to the end of the book and it's so profound because you've been allowed in your own mind to make those connection points, which are so much more powerful than having had that literally been said to you, you know.
And how do you do that as a director though? Like as an artist, how do you create that?
Well, I think that's what I'm trying to figure out. So, I'm really excited for that challenge, and I think that's what I'm wanting to do in my next projects. And it's a question I've been asking myself for many, many years, and maybe will spend the rest of my life trying to find a visual language for that. But I know that's the kind of thing that really excites me, and I find all the works that have had the strongest impact on me are the ones that have had this kind of layered, textured quality to it, where my brain has been allowed to imagine further than what that actual medium has in and of itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, totally.
Which is really profound and really beautiful, and kind of speaks to how unlimited our imaginations can be, you know.
One of the things I wanted to chat to you about was Diff and the Film Mart. And you actually invested in going, basically. You paid your money. You were one of the people who, because a lot of people who go to Diff, you know, like to the Film Mart especially, are there as guests, as delegates. They've, you know, been invited and stuff. And what I loved was that you were someone who paid to be there, but B, that you were so engaged and so involved and so a part of the film festival, because a lot of people do that and then they just want to network and socialize and stuff like that, and like don't get much value out of it. So did you see it as a good investment?
Oh my word, it was the most extraordinary 4 days I've experienced in the film industry ever.
And you've worked in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel like I've done so little, but I just, the information that I got in the last couple of days was overwhelming, really good, but overwhelming in the volume of it, that I actually am exhausted now. And I
can imagine there's going to be stuff that you're going to be like, you know, still thinking. For me personally, there's stuff that like I'm thinking about still, that's you know, like just with conversations I've had with people, like that's rattling around in my head. So I can only imagine you as like a filmmaker and as someone who probably, how many sessions did you attend?
All of them. I did all of them. I didn't ever take a break. I mean, look, so, and this is I mean, it's amazing, but it's also frustrating, is that there's multiple sessions held in an hour. So you sometimes just have to pick, and there were so many where I was so torn, and I just had to let one of them go and walk into the other session. So, but I literally never skipped a session. I was just starving for that information, and I think it was such an incredible combination of really practical, helpful information that it explains to you the industry if you are not going to try make it in the Hollywood machine. Festivals and how one can survive as a filmmaker through festivals, and people who would possibly buy your film at a festival. Like, I learned so much information about that.
That's stuff you didn't know about any of that kind of stuff?
No, not at all. I didn't, and I don't know if this makes me incredibly ignorant as someone who claims to be part of the film industry, but to not know, to the extent of not fully understanding the industry side of a festival.
I would say most DOPs don't know what the producer really does. Like, you know, you have an understanding, but like at Diff you get to hear, like, well, at DFM you get to hear, like, from the producer's mouth exactly how they did it. So exactly, and the same thing from the other side, you know, like producers get to hear how DOPs handle their jobs, and
Yeah, so I mean, a combination of that really good practical information, just understanding, you know, ideas of distribution and the co-production and all these big words that I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like such a child because I didn't know this. But
business side of things, though.
yeah,
and like as a freelancer now, it's very important.
Yes,
to
very
have an
helpful to know.
understanding.
Yeah, and also understanding that there's so many funding avenues across the world that you can potentially access. What are some of the major festivals that are worth kind of going after in terms of funding? Also things that that you can apply for, like labs, or the fact that you can pitch, so it's worth looking out for opportunities to pitch or get invited to pitch. All of that stuff, you know, just help me understand the ABCs of that world. And then there's kind of the more philosophical side of it, where a lot of incredible conversation around decolonial, like towards finding decolonial ways of filmmaking in the African continent, and such incredible conversations around that. And you know, you're watching a panel discussion with industry experts that perhaps I didn't know who they were before, but once I understood who they were, once I understood who they were and where they came from, I was like, I'm incredibly lucky to be in a room with this person right now and to have such direct access, because I think the beauty of it as well is that it's not huge in the way that Sundance would be huge, you know, or Cannes would be huge, where...
But even there, I don't think the industry programs are like massive. Like
I don't know, I mean, they talked about there being 10,000 people at those things, where your access to people is so limited, and your potential to genuinely connect with someone, there's so little time because people want to meet everyone.
I'm so like blessed with that for years. I mean, it's been this incredible thing for me. Like whether I'm working it or not, I meet amazing people from around the world, like constantly. Like I just met the most phenomenal, not just filmmakers, but people in the industry who are, and I would assume that like the industry programs overseas, you know, would be similar to DIF, because DIF is a big festival. Like if you like in comparison to like other South African festivals, especially, and you know, quite a few around the world even, but obviously not on Sundance and Cannes level. Like, but I would think that their industry programs would be more exclusive almost. Like you wouldn't be able to get in there almost. And like with DIF, the cool thing is you can just, you know, pay and submit and then come and learn for a whole weekend. And that's, like, what was the biggest thing you learned, would you say?
I think from a practical perspective was just learning that festivals are a great platform to try get into in terms of being able to pitch to people.
Those are things you didn't know about before.
Yeah, embarrassingly so. I'm sorry.
Not embarrassingly so. This is why you went there to learn about this. And like, I think it's a side of film that people don't realize, that most films in the world these days like are surviving on festivals, you know, like and there's lots of festivals around the world, there's lots of programmers, and there's lots of funding from different festivals and different countries, and that you can access. And so that's why, like, I think it's perfect that you went and now you know about this stuff.
And that, you know, things like the KZN Film Commission, if you get development funding through them, which I then have seen the process of friends who have gotten development funding for a feature that they're busy putting together, because of being given the funding, they were then invited to be part of the Durban Film Mart pitching program. And just learning practical steps like that, where before I didn't have handles on, hey, I want to make a film, who's gonna fund this thing, you know? And coming from my arts background, I actually have been researching arts funding for filmmaking, you know, which I'm sure you can also get, but it's incredibly helpful to know that
way smaller.
There's this whole world of funding that I didn't know about before. And then I think from not so much a practical perspective, but just an inspiring, creative perspective was, I think listening to filmmakers who have got a lot more experience than me. There was one masterclass in particular by a documentary filmmaker. His name is Siam Mohammed.
Okay.
So he is an Egyptian filmmaker, and he worked on two films whose name I actually recognized but hadn't seen, so I'm really keen to watch them now, because when I saw the trailers I just wanted to weep. The one was called Whose Country and the other one was called Amal, and both Egyptian documentaries.
I know who he is now.
Yeah, so and you know, he was just casually explaining like his history, and then it just so turns out that he's been in the Academy, he's part of the Academy Awards jury group, or I don't know what you technically call it, but like just this humble human who's a big deal in documentary filmmaking and is recognized for it, and he just happens to be on stage kind of sharing with us his process of documentary filmmaking, and he just said such profound things about the creative process and about kind of getting into those vulnerable spaces of filming people in really difficult moments, as part of telling a story that's just really true and really grips at your heart, you know. And yeah, I think just being able to hear that kind of stuff from people with a lot more experience is just incredibly encouraging.
And you get to talk to them afterwards as well.
And you get to talk to them afterwards.
Like
how even?
How awesome is it that like, yeah, people are just so open with their time as well. Like, that's what I found about Diff that was awesome, was just these people who really have done like amazing big things. Like, so for me, like, you know, as a moderator for a lot of the panels, you know, I had to, like, I didn't know the names of half these people. I knew half of them and I didn't know half of them. And the half I knew, I thought, great stuff, love their work. And the other half, I'm just like, holy shit. Like, whilst I'm going through it, it's like, oh, you've done this, you've done that, you've done all these massive things. And when talking to them on stage, they're just so casually giving out information that I'm like, you, like, if you were, like, at varsity, this was what they should be telling you, essentially. Like...
No, it's so humbling, and I think just, it was just so special, and also they just... I think you just kind of see a very human face to these kinds of people, you know, and
it makes it easier for you, like, long term. Like, do you feel like I can do this now because you see like the human side of these people?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. But it's so humbling just to see how generous so many of these filmmakers were with sharing of themselves, and how open and engaging they were. Just even about having a normal conversation, you know. I just, it just felt like such a privilege, and also encouraging to know that there are good and kind people in this filmmaking industry, you know. I think sometimes it can feel very scary to think that there's a lot of hard people and a lot of people who, I don't know, can just be very difficult. So I was amazed really by how accommodating everyone in that space was. I don't think I came across anyone who felt contrived or...
Yeah, I think the program was very well curated this year.
Yeah.
Like, definitely just the topics they had on, the people they had on, it was pretty high quality. And also, I think the people who are doing the Film Mart this year know a lot of the people in the industry. Like, they've got a good understanding of who's cool and who's not, essentially. So I feel like they were able to curate it in a way that they just brought the cool people. Like, you know, that was it. They were just like, let's just bring people who are dope, people who are willing to share their information, who have done cool things, and who we respect. And I think that turned it into a really cool program, and one that, like, it turned out pretty valuable for me. It turned out very valuable for me. And just in general, like, it reinvigorated, like, I still, like, I've only watched one film at this stuff. I even went to watch Spider-Man last night. But I'm going to go watch another one today. But it did have me reinvigorated, like, about film and about art and about culture in South Africa. So I kind of, just wanted to, like, get your perspective on it, you know, just in that way of, like, where to from here. Like, now that you've been at this DFM, now that you've watched all these, like, wonderful films and stuff, how are you feeling about things? What are you, like, you've got your mockumentaries you want to do, you've got your documentary, what's the next step? Funding looking for?
So I started having conversations with my friends who have already gotten development funding, so who understand the process a bit better than I do. just want to meet and chat with them just to understand in terms of how far along my ideas are. Is it ready to apply for development funding? Because I know that the next KZN Film Commission funding deadline is end of August. And so hopefully I can get 1, maybe 2 projects in for that. And sort of take it from there and see if I can somehow get some funding and then actually turn this very long dream that I've had to do these things into a reality, which in some ways is terrifying. There's something very scary about having to commit to turning your like babies in your mind into actual ideas and the hard work that you need to put into it.
Trust me, I know.
Gonna try my best to be brave. Yeah, so I think that yeah, and then kind of also just wanting to develop all the other kind of work I do, because there's I do a lot of drawing and writing, and all of that long-term and big picture I think serves towards being able to create works that cross over between film and other visual arts. So
how do you find the time to do all the different kinds of art though? Because I've seen like you write poetry as well. And,
yeah.
Like, yeah, so you say you draw, you're creating films.
Yeah.
And then also you're doing your freelance like work. So
yeah, I mean, it sounds like I do a lot, but there's a lot of artist block. There's a lot of artist block in that, eh? So the very harsh reality is that there's something quite terrifying about having to sit down and commit to doing stuff. Yeah. And very recently, what's been super helpful, although I have been disrupted because of DFM, like about a month ago with a friend, we sort of we said for the month of July, every day we have to send each other a photograph of something that we've made.
So like an accountability buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the month, whoever's done less has to, I don't remember, buy a meal or whatever. I'm definitely buying the meal this month because he's very much winning. But I had a really good track record the first week of July, and then everything just went pear-shaped. But I think that has been very helpful for me in terms of sitting down. And I think trying to start taking myself more seriously when I say I'm an artist, actually back myself on that, But
I'm feeling you on that, because that's where I'm at this year, basically. Yeah. I'm like, no, you can do this.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a funny one. Someone told me a quote the other day. I'm terrible at remembering quotes or who said them, but it was some famous writer. He said something about that the act of writing is excruciating for him. What he loves is having written.
Yep.
And I so deeply identified with that. And that
is being an artist.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm the only one, because I look at other friends who are artists who are so highly productive and are pushing constantly, and they don't seem to have this absolute terrifying fear that I seem to experience on a daily basis of, I actually have to force myself to sit down, because if I don't, I will spend the rest of my life not sitting down to make.
I actually totally relate to that, but it is just a matter of forcing myself to do it. But I procrastinate. Fuck loads. People think I do a lot, and I do, but a lot of what I do is admin work to distract myself. Yeah. So I actually managed to get a lot done because I'm trying not to do the creative things that I'm meant to be doing. I'm meant to, I've got a deadline for tomorrow, but I'm going to be emailing, just about whatever dumb admin I have, for 3 hours straight when I could be writing. And then, I'm up until 3 a.m. It's 12 o'clock and I'm like, let's get started now.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. But at the same time, I do think there's value in letting ideas gestate, and procrastination is valuable.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, for me, the only cure to artist block, as you call it, but for me it's writer's block, is just starting. It's about sitting down and writing a sentence. It doesn't matter if it's a good sentence, and but it's also because I live in a deadline based world. I don't have a choice of having writer's block anymore. I don't get to, because I've got to deliver something at this time no matter what. So
it's going to be shit or it's going to be good, but it's going to be delivered.
Yeah.
That's like,
and it's one more piece of work than you had before.
exactly. But then that's also work versus art, and like, ugh, it's
Yeah.
such a big difference.
Yeah, but I mean, still, I think even your work can.
It's got artistry in it.
Yeah, and it definitely helps you to hone and refine your creative practice. You know, I mean.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think the like hundreds of articles I've written have definitely actually helped me with the one-man show I'm writing at the
Yeah.
moment, because I'm able to like take ideas further than before and like actually just keep writing, like, you know, like just like flowing with stuff. And whereas before, like, I would have like written a sentence and like, you know, tried to perfect that sentence. Nowadays I don't even fucking bother with that, and that comes from experience. That comes from
Yeah.
knowing that you can edit, knowing that you can go back and change, like, you know, things that
Yeah.
the thing you start with is not the thing you finish with.
Yes, and actually learning that more and more is incredibly helpful. I mean, I know, so from a video editing perspective, I used to, look, I'm a slow person at the best of times, so I will never be fast and I will never be called a fast editor. But I have learned to not panic so much if an edit looks terrible in its first draft, because I've learned to slowly more and more trust my process. That funnily enough, what I was saying earlier about layering, even with my editing, it's a very layered process. So if you go and look at my work, you'll see elements of what I was talking about, like that there's crossovers, but that kind of stuff takes time to refine and to distill. So it starts off looking really chaotic and messy, and the timeline is like, what are you even doing? But you just know that the fifth time I go over this, things are going to be in the right place, and eventually that story will come through. And I'm forgetting my point. What was the point I wanted to make?
Well, you're talking about editing being layered.
Yeah, but it was in reference to what you were saying, which was it's a process.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, this was the point I wanted to make, is that, and like so many people say this, but I just also know that I'm finding this more and more, is really trying to learn that perfection is the killer of creativity, and that it is fundamental to learn how to play when you're making something.
I know you don't know this because you haven't really checked out the stuff with the podcast, but perfection is the enemy of good is the like tagline on our Facebook and stuff. Cause
Amazing.
it's like, I prefer perfection is the enemy of good enough was like, so that was the original quote, was perfection is the enemy of good, and I can't remember who took it further, but some like a comedian or another writer said like perfection is the enemy of good enough. And when I first heard that, I was just like, like mind exploded, and that's kind of been a big like game changer for me. It's allowed me to produce probably more average work on, like, you know, on average, but also a lot more work. And, you know, that's better, I think, in the long term than having written 5 things in my entire life, and they all suck because I've got no experience at writing. Meanwhile, now I've written a lot of things, and some of them are good and some of them are not. And that's also fine as an artist to do that as well, to realize that, hey, like, some of my work's not going to be good.
Yeah, and I think also to let go of the pressure of, oh my word, this thing that I'm working on now is going to be my
masterpiece.
Yeah, like my masterpiece and my one and only shot at being hung up in like the Museum of Modern Art, you know.
Because meanwhile, this thing you're going to create is probably, you know, 200 people are going to see it, and then the next thing you create, 400 people are going to see it, and the next thing, eventually you might get to the Museum of Modern Art, but I get you, we prevent ourselves from starting because we're like, I want to create this great work, and like, you can create this great work that, you know, is great, but doesn't necessarily get into the Museum of Modern Art, but eventually through constantly creating those great works and constantly doing the thing, you eventually get there.
Yeah, and like for 99% of creatives who I've spoken to whose career paths I admire or whose work I admire, I mean, when I've actually heard them speak about it, every single one of them has talked about it was just a constant step by step, and 10 years ago I was not where I'm at now, and this did not magically just happen. And I mean, it's, you know, I think it's so easy to just feel that I mean, as I literally just said, things just magically happen for people, and they suddenly happen to be on stage and having made this really successful film and talking about it, and you're like, no, there was a lot of
no's.
Learning and a lot of no's, and it's funny how we always forget that, you know.
Well, that's not what we see. That's not what we're sold.
Yeah, that's true. So it was great actually to hear some filmmakers even talk about that. Sean Drummond actually, he spoke about that in his masterclass, and it was just really encouraging to hear what he had to say about that. And as a varsity student, then starting on in his early years of having a company and doing a lot of corporate work, and I was like, oh wow, I also do a lot of corporate work.
Relatable.
Maybe I'm not a failure, you know. So yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Camilla. This has been such a great chat, and like
Yay.
I'm so like, yeah, I've learned a lot from you, and I think people are gonna learn a lot from you in this podcast. And I'm just so glad that like we bumped into each other and started talking at DFM, because I was hoping to find new people at the film festival to chat to. I've got people on my list who like I've always wanted to chat to, but I was really hoping to meet new people, and it's cool meeting you, and like you've got such a dope story, so thank you.
Aw, thanks so much. I hope I wasn't too shy and awkward, but we came to the end of it all right.
I think now you're more shy and awkward than you have been for like the last hour, so you're good. Cool.
That's funny.